Hello, preachers. Here's hoping this video finds you well, feeling confident in the message you are preparing for God's people this Sunday. I'm Sarah Holler, mentor with Backstory Preaching, with week 2 of our consideration of Preach, Come What May. Last week, we examined the importance of the preacher's self-awareness. When proclaiming or explicating challenging text, when taking up controversial issues, having a realistic sense of who it is we're bringing into the pulpit helps us overcome our internal biases. Self-reflection helps us determine whether we are more apt to comfort than convict, whether we are more likely to avoid the hard parts of the good news, or whether we are more likely to provoke than to persuade. Internal checks help us identify our fears and anxieties and help us center ourselves on God's call to preach authentic gospel rather than the cause du jour or the going down the easy news only. This week, we look at who's in the pews, who it is that has come to be comforted or challenged, who will be aligned with the message, who will be suspicious. Having a sense of who's in the room helps the preacher frame the message in a way that can be heard, and from hearing, move to considering, and from considering to possible transformation, which is the goal of all sermons. So, big parishes, small parishes, urban churches, rural missions, dwindling congregations, burgeoning church plants, kids out the wazoo, gray hair and canes, conservative, liberal, traditional, progressive, high church, low church. The demographics of the places we serve may vary, but there are some universal truths. The people sitting in the pews are God's beloved. Whether they love you or not, whether they agree with your world view or not, whether they see God in the way you do or not, they are God's beloved. They are made in God's image. They carry God's divine spark within them. They are worthy of respect and generosity of spirit. To call and proclaim God's good news begins with locating an affection for God's people. So as we begin to prepare to articulate hard news, controversial realities, challenging issues, we remind ourselves God has anointed us to bring His beloved along, to take them where they are and draw them deeper into His heart. We begin by remembering their innate goodness and God's deep love for them. Another common truth is on a Sunday morning, people have made real effort to be present. They have said no to staying in their pajamas, drinking good coffee, and slowly reading the paper. They've said no to throwing on sweats and going for brunch. They may have roused reluctant teens out of bed. Maybe they've pushed achy bones into support hose and worked hard to find a zipper. They've driven a ways, parked a car, made their way into church to give thanks and praise to God. They've come with stresses and worries generally not known. They're praying for someone dear to them who's struggling mightily. They're wishing their marriage was more loving, or their children had more friends, or their mother wasn't so negative. People in our pews are dealing with the brokenness of the world and the brokenness of their own lives. They may look well put together, but somewhere, on some days, they are hurting. And they come to church to find peace and encouragement. They also come hoping to find and mine God's dream for them. They come hoping to claim their belovedness. They come hoping to participate in God's good news, and sometimes that happens, which is why they come back. So these tender souls, these children, these most precious of God, come to be encouraged and affirmed and instructed and loved and set loose to live better, to do better. They come with mostly good intent. And when we have hard things to say, it helps us to remember this first. When we shape our message from a place of love for God's people, the intent is genuinely persuasive. It also has the advantage of being the way of Jesus. Of course, there are instances where he was more pointed with his opponents, but with the people, he was mostly patient. I think this is one takeaway from the story of the rich young man. Jesus told him what was required, but the man resisted. Jesus didn't relent. He didn't change the charge, but he also looked at the man with love. He hoped better for him and held out hope that he might be turned in the future. When we preach the challenging parts of the gospel, can we hold that same hope? Can we say the hard things aware that some folk won't be moved, and yet can we stay the course? Can we preach uncomfortable texts with an invitation to a new perspective and maintain a spiritual maturity which allows us to hold resistance calmly? When a member of our congregation says, "I don't come to church to hear politics," can we hear the longing beneath the irritation? Can we hear the longing beneath their irritation? Can we be courageous enough to ask, "Tell me more"? Not everyone is facile enough, self-examining enough to articulate the root cause of their discomfort with challenging gospel news. But unless they've been severely traumatized, God's beloved don't want people to starve. They don't want children gunned down in schools. They don't want toddlers separated from their parents at the border. They don't want people fleeing other countries, washing up dead on their beaches. They want the planet to be healthy for future generations. They think people should be protected by police regardless of their skin color. They want honest people to have a secure life. If they have a problem with the message preached, it's likely because they don't see how taking care of those needs can happen without diminishing their own lives in some way, and they are afraid of that diminishment. These are God's beloved. They come for God's good news. Can they find welcome even when we have hard things to tell? Can they trust us to tell the truth in love? Can we trust God to guide us in the telling? Things to ponder this week as we consider preaching come what may. Blessings on your reflections, dear ones.